March 2015, The Walking Dead is a cultural phenomenon. For 5 years the show had continued to dazzle critics and fans across the globe. Season 5's premiere, No Sanctuary, had a colossal 17.29 million viewers in the US, with the season ending with an average of a huge 14.38 million viewers per episode. March 2015 was also the first time when The Walking Dead's long-rumoured spin-off show finally got its official title, Fear the Walking Dead. It's fair to say not many people were a fan of the show's name. I remember when I first heard it myself and I thought it was pretty stupid, and internet articles dating back to that time seem to suggest I'm not the only one who had this opinion. There also seemed to be those who expressed doubt whether the show would grab them in the same way that The Walking Dead had. Whilst Fear did have the unique premise of it being set before the events of The Walking Dead, with the prospect of witnessing the fall of society being one that I'm sure some fans could get excited about, others instead looked at how far into the zombie apocalypse The Walking Dead had strayed and thought to themselves, do I really want to go back? I mean, The Walking Dead Season 5 premiere featured characters knelt over bathtubs being whacked in the head with baseball bats and then having their throats slit by a group of cannibals, which culminated in Rick getting his own back by butchering them in a church a couple of episodes later. Rick and his fellow protagonists were a badass team who were well equipped to deal with the threat of other humans as well as walkers, yet here Fear the Walking Dead was asking fans to get excited about the prospect of watching a dysfunctional family who weren't even aware that the dead could come back to life. Furthermore, the fact that Kirkman said that viewers wouldn't actually learn about how the Walker outbreak started before the show launched was yet another nail in the coffin for those who were on the fence about giving Fear a go. However, despite all these potential negative points, in terms of its timing, it still made perfect sense for The Walking Dead to be launching a spin-off during this period, a period in which it was achieving unrivaled success. When nearly 15 million people were watching The Walking Dead every week, you only really need half, hell, maybe even a third of those to tune into Fear, and you've got yourself another huge success. You've got yourself another brand, another money-making machine. Despite the reservations relating to the new show, at this point in time The Walking Dead seemed to be unstoppable, meaning Fear the Walking Dead seemed like a relatively safe bet for even more success for the zombie franchise. Fear the Walking Dead's premiere aired originally on the 23rd of August 2015. Initial reviews for the opening episode were mixed. Some outlets praised the tension and the chemistry of the main cast, whilst others bemoaned its slow pacing and didn't take to many of the main characters who on first impression seemed to be quite unlikable. Fear's opening episode is very risky and plays it nowhere near as safe compared to The Walking Dead's pilot. In the main show, we are introduced to Rick, a dude we can get behind almost immediately. We sympathise with him from the onset when he's talking to Shane about how cruel his wife Laurie had been to him in front of his son Carl, and there's also something rather likeable in watching the banter between him and Shane whilst together in the police car. It seems natural and is the type of conversation you could envision these two friends actually having. Shortly after this conversation, Rick is shot, he goes into a coma, and he wakes up to a world that has fallen apart which is being terrorised by the undead. With the world falling apart around him, Rick has one thing on his mind, finding his wife and son. Admittedly, a man needing to find his family is a pretty simple motivation for a main character to have, but it's one that nearly every viewer can instantly get behind. Within the space of 10 to 15 minutes of The Walking Dead's first episode, the show manages to get its viewers to root for Rick. Everyone wants him to succeed, and they understand his pain and shock when he's rolling around on the floor of his home in despair, screaming "Carl!" when it turns out his son and wife are long gone. Carl! 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 Contrast this to Fear's first episode, which begins in a dimly lit church which is home to some dope heads. Main character Nick is busy getting high and ends up sprinting away from the church after witnessing his girlfriend, who has become a walker, chomping on some poor soul who is on the floor. Nick is knocked down by a car after the panic causes him to run into the middle of the street, with the camera panning up to show that society hasn't yet fallen, and Nick quite possibly being one of the few people who actually knows what a walker is. Rick symbolises everything that is stereotypically seen as good and righteous. He's a cop, he protects people, he was shot by a man breaking the law, he put his life on the line for others. He's also a devoted husband and father, another thing that most people in society see as a good thing and something to aspire to. In comparison, although we know very little about Nick by the time Fear's opening crawl begins, we would have still made some assumptions about him by this point because we're human and that's just what we do, it's only natural. Now, my immediate reaction when I first saw Nick was that he was this privileged kid turned junkie. Now, I don't know why I thought he was privileged, that was just my instinctive reaction to seeing him, and I immediately found it hard to care about him despite him later going on to become my favourite character in the show. When you think about it, it's actually incredibly judgmental of me to have made all these assumptions about Nick based on only a couple of minutes of footage, but judgmental as it may be, it didn't stop me feeling this way. This opening scene is followed by a moody Alicia moaning in the shower when her mum tells her to hurry up, Nick refusing to cooperate with the police when being asked who is supplying the drugs when he's in hospital, his mother Madison visiting said hospital and it being immediately obvious that she favours her junkie son over her daughter for some reason, and her partner Travis is by her side, and in all honesty he seems like a bit of a pushover. We are following a dysfunctional family and not one that's very easy to care about, at least initially. However, it is undeniably real. Families are like this, people are flawed, and the show deserves some credit for having the balls to have its protagonist have real depth and flaws. I disliked Fear's slow opener on first viewing, and despite me thinking that it's an okay episode now, the big issue that it suffers, as does the rest of the first season, is that it's all very cliche. As I mentioned, Nick is the only one who knows about the walkers in the first episode. Well, unless you include Tobias, who's been clearly doing his research from Reddit. But anyway, how many horror films or shows have we seen in which there's a character who knows about the looming threat or the danger in the background, but no one else believes them? It's been done so many times before. There's no question as to whether Nick was hallucinating or not in the church because we all know about walkers. 25 minutes into the opening episode of Fear the Walking Dead, and it's really hard not to feel like the show is just wasting time. We know Nick is right, we know about the undead, so let's just skip all the bullshit and get to it. This is a major issue of having a show set in the same universe as another show which is already way further ahead than it. The viewer knows what is coming and knows more than the characters do, so the element of surprise is gone. Instead, it's hard not to feel like we are just watching the same thing we've seen already, albeit framed slightly differently. I do wonder now if part of the reason that Kirkman put Rick in a coma in The Walking Dead was because nearly everyone on the planet is already aware of zombies and what they are, so perhaps he decided just to skip all that stuff in the beginning that we've seen already. It's kind of how, like in the MCU Spider-Man movies, they've decided to ditch showing us the Uncle Ben incident because it's been done to death and we are all aware of Spider-Man's origins and don't need it explained to us again. It would appear that many of those who watched Fear's first season when it originally aired agree with me, as the US viewers dropped by nearly 4 million people in the space of just 6 episodes. Now, season 1 isn't terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but when you've already watched The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead can't help but feel slow and drawn out in comparison. There's some good parts. Daniel Salazar, for example, is brilliant. It's interesting when the military arrive on the scene to set up a quarantine zone, especially as it echoes what's going on in some places of the world right now, but it doesn't do enough in my opinion to grab people and make them feel like it's something that they should keep watching. Although a significant number of viewers had already given up with the show by season 2 rolled around, Fear still had a rather large audience to fall back on, whom it needed to try and impress with its second season. Unfortunately, like its first season, season 2 ended up being very hit and miss with both viewers and critics. Again, like the first season, season 2 isn't terrible by any stretch of the imagination. It does have a lot of original ideas, certainly more than season 1. However, it does also once again borrow many themes that were already explored on The Walking Dead. A woman who refuses to kill walkers and instead locks them up in her cellar? Who does that remind you of? For anyone who had watched The Walking Dead, it's hard to watch Season 2 of Fear and not be overcome by a huge sense of deja vu. Despite this, Season 2 does do a lot right with its treatment of its main cast of characters. Madison takes no prisoners and is well on her way to developing into the stern, no-nonsense woman that we know her to be as in Season 3. I mean, the way she taunts one of the pregnant pirates who are trying to hijack the Abigail by asking her when the baby last kicked, then going on to say that the baby might already be dead and will eat her from the inside is unbelievably dark, and gives a sense of just how ruthless she can be. Nick gains independence and effortlessly adapts to the new world, enjoying his sense of freedom that the apocalypse has brought and often going out on his own adventures. Strand's backstory is greatly expanded upon, with his character being more fleshed out than his solitary appearance in Season 1. Alicia, like Nick, also becomes more accustomed to the world around her, with her becoming more than capable of looking after herself, and the ending of the season in which Travis finds out about the death of his son and goes absolutely crazy on the guy who killed him is incredible. It's a solid season of TV, much better than the first, albeit not without its flaws and problems. Season 3, however, is when the show really comes into its own. It's incredible, and that isn't me over-exaggerating it or trying to oversell it, it really is fantastic. Airing a couple of months after the universally panned awful 7th season of The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead's 3rd season was a much needed antidote for those who had grown tired of The Walking Dead's meandering pace and cheap tricks that were ever present during season 6 and 7. If you need one example of season 3's greatness, then Troy Otto is the best that I can give you. Introduced in the premiere as a soldier who's partaking in disgusting experiments by shooting prisoners and recording how long it takes them to turn, this maniac somehow becomes, dare I say it, likeable by the end of the season. I hated him during the premiere and was pissed when he managed to get away with his crimes, but by the end of the season, I'll admit I was sad to see him go. I don't want to talk too much about this season, as I've already reviewed it, and I don't really want to bore people who watch that lengthy video by going over the same points again, but it is just fantastic in my opinion, and well worth sitting through the first 2 seasons to get to. Sadly, despite how good this season is, viewing figures still dwindled, with US viewers for the finale being 2.23 million, a huge fall for a show which only a couple of years prior had a premiere watched by nearly 10 million people. However, these figures don't tell the whole story. Yes, I guess that the season 3 finale viewing figures didn't make pretty viewing for AMC executives, but let's not forget that the 3rd season began with 3.11 million viewers before dropping to 2.23, meaning that although some viewers did give up the show, it did manage to maintain most of its audience throughout the entire season. Whilst the 3rd season might not have attracted the numbers that AMC so desperately wanted, it was by far the best critically received season of the show. I mean, it was actually the positive review of Fear's 3rd season posted by IGN after the season finished that convinced me to give the show another go after I gave up during the 1st season on initial viewing. There was a definite buzz surrounding Fear's 3rd season after it finished. Word of mouth was spreading about how good it was, and disillusioned fans of The Walking Dead were switching to the show after hearing that it did away with all the nonsense that Scott Gimple pushed during The Walking Dead's 7th season. Many of the comments on the IGN review mentioned that Fear had overtaken The Walking Dead as the better show, with some even suggesting that season 3 was the best season of both shows combined. There's also a rather prophetic comment from a user who says they are worried about Scott Gimple coming over to Fear and ruining the show. Oh, if only they knew what was to come. November 27, 2017. AMC's UK Twitter page announced that The Walking Dead's Morgan will be crossing over into The Walking Dead. Seeing as Fear the Walking Dead was significantly behind The Walking Dead in terms of its timeline, most news outlets reporting on the story made the educated guess that Morgan's appearance would be in the form of some kind of flashback. I mean, this was a guy who had only appeared in 2 episodes of The Walking Dead up until his reintroduction at the end of season 5, so there were potentially a lot of gaps in his story that could be explored further. However, Scotty G and AMC had other ideas, with said ideas involving Fear the Walking Dead jumping forward roughly 2 years to accommodate Morgan's presence. This news, as expected, did not go down well with fans. Season 3 of Fear ended with the protagonist facing down the new villains, the Proctors, on the top of a giant dam. Nick, having no other option, detonated a bunch of explosives that were hidden in the dam, in turn collapsing it, leaving the fate of the majority of the cast unknown. This was a huge cliffhanger to end things on, and fans had been speculating since the season ended about who would survive and what happened next. You can understand then the disappointment when it was announced that the show would now be set 2 years after this finale. Imagine being a fan of Fear the Walking Dead prior to season 4 and learning that your entire show was being changed, time was moving forward just to accommodate a side character from another show. It's unbelievably disrespectful to the audience to rearrange an entire show to fit in one crossover character, especially as it was one that they hadn't even asked for, and for many long-term viewers it felt like a slap in the face. However, there still existed some hope that season 3's cliffhanger would be addressed in flashbacks and such, but in truth, it never really was. The strange thing is that Fear the Walking Dead's marketing team seemed to have known that fans wanted to see a resolution to the 3rd season's cliffhanger ending, with them pushing out posters such as the one on screen now of a hand reaching up from the water before its 4th season aired. There also existed promo pictures of characters with the tagline "Who will rise up" accompanying them, which although may have multiple meanings, could be inferred as asking the question of who will rise up from the water, i.e. which of these characters survived the dam explosion. Yet despite this promo material, Fear's 4th 4th season offered no satisfying answer to the question it was trying to sell, as once we rejoined our protagonist after the time jump, this event was now a distant memory. And as for Proctor John and his group, well, your guess is as good as mine with regards to what happened to them, because they haven't been mentioned in the show since. In terms of its structure, Fear the Walking Dead's 4th season is an absolute mess. The story advanced forward in time to accommodate Morgan, but also insisted on featuring flashbacks during its first half of the season, which showed the original cast living in a baseball stadium which was set after the dam exploded. During one point, Nick even has a flashback whilst we are watching a flashback. Simply put, there's just no need for Fear's timeline to end up being this disorganised and messy. I mean, if this was part of the show's DNA during the first 3 seasons and fans had become accustomed to this kind of structure previously, then fine, I could understand this approach being used in season 4. But to come in after 3 seasons and change Fear from a story that was told chronologically to a show which had 2 or sometimes even 3 timelines for the audience to follow was a ridiculous error of judgment. I mean, if as a writer you feel the need to include title cards within the episodes with the words then and now on them to explain what is happening, then you're clearly doing something wrong, because it means you don't trust your audience to work out what is going on within your convoluted narrative. Westworld's first season is a perfect example of how a program can benefit from showing multiple timelines to its audience. By the end of the season, everything comes together and the payoff feels absolutely worth it. Fear the Walking Dead Season 4A, on the other hand, just has no payoff to come from taking this approach to its storytelling. Prime example, in episode 3, Nick is killed by an annoying brat named Charlie, who the show tries and fails miserably to make viewers care about. Fear not though, because Nick still lives on for the rest of the half a season in flashbacks. That's right, 3 episodes into season 4, AMC decides to kill one of the main protagonists of the show, a guy whose bloody face is on the DVD and Blu-ray cover for season 3, and expects us to feel satisfied in seeing him in flashbacks after he's already dead. It just doesn't make any sense. To add insult to injury, the Nick we see in the flashbacks isn't anything like the Nick we've come to know since the beginning of the show. Instead of being a fearless, adventurous young adult, he is now suffering from PTSD, with him having flashbacks within the flashback scenes themselves in an attempt to explain his change in behaviour. I'm not joking, Fear Season 4 has flashbacks within flashbacks to attempt to explain why a character in said flashbacks is completely different from the one the season prior, even though in the present he's dead anyway. Why? Who cares? You've butchered his character, he's dead, these flashbacks aren't going to accomplish anything. It's completely ridiculous. Another example of Season 4's split timelines adding absolutely nothing to the show is the awful way in which it handles Madison Clark. I previously mentioned that Fear's Season 4 promotional posters didn't actually line up with what happened on the show, and this particular poster featuring Madison front and centre with Morgan standing behind her is perhaps the worst offender of all. Madison's position front and centre suggested she would still be one of the main characters on Fear the Walking Dead come Season 4. Placing a character in the forefront of a poster or promotional material normally suggests they will have a big role to play in whatever media it is they are advertising. For example, Disney wouldn't have made Rey the focal point of this Star Wars Episode 9 poster if she was only going to be in the movie for 5 minutes, although it might have been a better film if she was. Therefore, most Fear fans made the educated guess that once again Madison would play a major role. And there was a lot of speculation pre-season as to how this no-nonsense Killer Be Killed Madison would deal with the all life is precious Morgan. Would Morgan be able to tame Madison, or would Madison's attitude bring out the killer in Morgan that he was trying to keep locked up inside of him? All things considered, there existed a decent potential for these characters to bounce off one another, with it being an interesting prospect debating how their first encounter would go down. However, the truth is, these two characters never even met. Despite Madison standing next to Morgan on the poster, they never came anywhere near as close to one another on the show, because it turns out Madison was already dead by the time Morgan arrived in Season 4, Episode 1. Even though Madison was alive and well in the flashbacks, fans still had no idea where she was in the present, with it being revealed in Episode 8 that she died at the baseball stadium. And this is when the convoluted split timeline nonsense of the 4th season comes to an end. This is the supposed payoff of all these flashbacks. A main character dying in one of the dumbest ways possible, with Fear being too cheap to even show the majority of the scene play out, instead using pictures to depict it. It was absolutely pointless and completely unsatisfying. What was the expected reaction here? Did the writers really think viewers would come out and applaud the show for spending half a season not telling them where one of the main protagonists of the last 3 seasons was, before then laughing in their face and saying, "She's dead. She's been dead all along. Pretty clever, right?" I mean, Jesus, what were they thinking? Instead of wasting all this time with flashback nonsense and distorted timelines only to end up with Madison and Nick both dead, they could have just had both of them die at the dam explosion. All we would have needed was a short scene showing them dying at the start of the season, maybe they had to sacrifice themselves to save Alicia, and then they could have just moved forward with the timeline to accommodate Morgan. However, it seems like Fear wanted to keep fans guessing about Madison in particular in a cheap attempt to try and keep people watching to find out her fate, which ultimately ended up with them shooting themselves in the foot when they decided to kill her. Or Fear could have just done without jumping forward in time altogether and had Morgan join the show during the gaps in his story from the past. Not only would it have been more interesting as it would have fleshed out his character more, it could have been accomplished without screwing up Fear's entire narrative. Sadly, the Morgan that Fear the Walking Dead got post-season 8 The Walking Dead Morgan is unbelievably boring. He'd already become stale on The Walking Dead, so it's a real shame that the showrunners and writers changed the show's entire storyline to accommodate this average character. In reality, Morgan's introduction to Fear comes down to one thing and one thing only: ratings. It was all just a cheap attempt to up the numbers, probably to please AMC's board members. No thought or respect was given to the original cast members and team when making this decision. Morgan's first appearance on Fear occurred on a day dubbed Survival Sunday, April 15th, 2018. On said Sunday, Fear the Walking Dead Season 4 premiere followed on from the finale of The Walking Dead Season 8 in a desperate attempt to gain viewers. Despite The Walking Dead not being anywhere near as popular as it was when Fear the Walking Dead first aired, AMC knew that there was usually an upturn in viewers during The Walking Dead's finales, so decided to use this as an attempt to piggyback some of those extra viewers over to Fear the Walking Dead. For reference, The Walking Dead Season 8 finale had 7.92 million viewers in the US, the highest amount of viewers since Season 8's mid-season premiere. But of course, even if Fear did attract some viewers from The Walking Dead during Survival Sunday, it wouldn't have really made a difference if none of them knew what the hell was going on with the show, as they wouldn't carry on watching. Thus, the soft reboot, which was Season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead, was created. I can imagine after the Season 4 premiere aired, when Scott Gimple saw the numbers, he was probably rubbing his hands in glee, thinking that his decision to soft reboot the show was justified. For what it's worth, Fear's Season 4 premiere is actually pretty good, despite the fact that it entirely focused on Morgan and feels like a different show entirely. It was well received and viewed by 4.9 million people on Survival Sunday, nearly double the amount that tuned into Fear's Season 3 finale. It seems the crossover had worked. Well, not quite. These numbers quickly degraded as the season went on, with Fear reaching a low of 1.52 million viewers by episode 12. In trying to appeal to everyone, Fear completely lost its way. Fans of The Walking Dead didn't really care enough about Morgan to stick with him on a new show, and I'm sure they were also confused as to what the hell was happening in the flashbacks with these characters they didn't know or care about. Whereas fans of Fear, on the other hand, hated seeing the show's original characters pushed to the sidelines in favour of new dull cast members. With Scott Gimple having a much larger presence behind the scenes than previously when developing Fear's 4th season, Fear turned into an exact replica of The Walking Dead at a time when The Walking Dead was at its worst in terms of quality. The colour that was present in Season 2 and 3 of Fear had gone completely. Instead, everything was shot with a dull grey filter effect. Characters no longer conversed like normal people, instead communicating in what can only be called Gimple speak, choosing to be philosophical and cryptic about the simplest things for no reason whatsoever than an attempt to make the dialogue seem more clever and meaningful than it actually was. Characters' personalities changed entirely. I already mentioned how Nick went from an adventurous young adult to a depressed PTSD sufferer, but he wasn't the only one to have his persona butchered. Madison, who according to the showrunner of the first 3 seasons, Dave Erickson, could have possibly became a villain later down the line, had out of nowhere turned into the female Morgan. Totally against violence and intent of helping every person on the planet, even though everything she went through in previous seasons had taught her to be wary of strangers. The change in her character was completely illogical. She went from a woman who shoved a spoon in a dude's eye socket and marched him around an army camp so she could find her family, to a woman who, when her camp was confronted by a new group in Season 4, just sat there and didn't do anything. I mean, in fairness, the new group, the Vultures, didn't really do anything either, just sitting outside the baseball stadium waiting for Madison's group to up and leave, with them being just the first in a line of lame villains to arrive on Fear the Walking Dead since Season 4's soft reboot. The appeal of Fear the Walking Dead prior to Season 4 4 was that it wasn't The Walking Dead, it was different, and Season 3 was much better than Season 6 to 8 of the main show. Coming into the 4th season, it shouldn't have been seeking to emulate The Walking Dead, instead it should have carried on down the path it was going. But instead, AMC panicked and decided a cheap crossover would be the answer to their ratings woes. You'd think by this point in time, AMC would have learnt that whilst cheap marketing stunts can provide a temporary boost to ratings, it doesn't equate to long-term success. The Negan cliffhanger in The Walking Dead might have resulted in 17 million Americans tuning in to watch see who got the bat in the Season 7 premiere, the highest amount of viewers since Season 5's No Sanctuary, but The Walking Dead was never the same after this point, with nearly 4.5 million people deciding to not watch the next installment. It's no surprise really then that a million of those who did watch Fear's Season 4 premiere didn't decide to stick around for the next entry. As well as adding Morgan to Fear, the show also introduced new characters John Dory, June, Althea and Charlie. Morgan on his own would have sufficed. There were already enough characters on the show prior to him coming on board, resulting in the established main cast either being killed or pushed to the sidelines. Replacing established characters with a bunch of new ones is a crazy thing to do 4 seasons into a show anyway, but if you are going to do it, you best make sure the characters you are adding are damn likeable. Fear, however, seemed to do the complete opposite, adding characters who are far worse than those already established on the show. Morgan ended up being as irritating as ever, and perhaps more so than he was on The Walking Dead. Althea is almost a parody, driving around in a tank-like vehicle with machine guns, insistent on filming everything and interviewing everyone, despite the fact that it's the end of the fucking world. June went through about 5 different name changes before she revealed her actual name was June, running away from our characters over and over again, with the writers for some reason expecting viewers to give a shit about her. And Charlie, well, she killed Nick so she can fuck off anyway. The only exception to this was John Dory, a genuinely nice and caring guy who is too good for the show. If Fear Season 4 had insisted on only adding John and Morgan to its cast, then I can without doubt say it would have been a much better show than what we unfortunately ended up with. I haven't mentioned the second half of Season 4, which featured a villain whose grand master plan centered on poisoning bottles of water found in boxes left on the side of the road. No, seriously, Fear's protagonist went from fighting a group who wanted control of a dam so they could have a valuable resource to trade, to a woman who liked drawing on walkers with pen and went around putting antifreeze in bottled water. I mean, I suppose both their evil plans involved water, so they have that in common, but I know which one I'd prefer to have actually seen expanded upon in Season 4. By the end of Season 4, Fear's viewing figures had reached even lower than 3. It was a critical disaster. Its Reddit page became swamped with pissed off fans who had seen their favourite show ruined, and I couldn't even manage reviewing the entire season when it first aired because I gave up with the show because it was so bad. The Morgan crossover hadn't worked at all, it was a failed experiment. I guess you could make the argument that based on Season 3's numbers, it looks like Fear's 4th season was always going to lose viewers anyway, even without the changes that were made. However, it would have undoubtedly have been a better show without Morgan. And who knows, maybe with 2 solid seasons under its belt, it could have been on the way up, but sadly, we will never know. As for Season 5, well, it only doubled down on the crappiness that came in Season 4. I've discussed a lot of changes that were made to the original characters in the previous chapter of this video, with these still applying to Season 5, and I don't want to list everything wrong with the season because I've already reviewed it, and also because, quite frankly, this video would go on for another 5 hours if I had to discuss all the season's flaws, so I'll just quickly list some of its worst moments. In the opening episode, the protagonists crashed their plane and risked their lives trying to help someone who asked them for help over the radio, even though in Season 2, Alicia answered a call to help on the radio whilst aboard the Abigail, and the ship was boarded by pirates. And it appears they learned absolutely nothing from that, but let's just forget about that, shall we? Characters are saved by a giant beer balloon. Yep, that really happens. Morgan has a poo, and for some reason, the writers felt we needed to see this. There are radioactive walkers which can be identified by some kind of necklace on their person, but this makes absolutely no sense because it doesn't take into account if the necklace falls off or goes missing. Alicia stops killing walkers for some reason and spends pretty much the entire season painting. Fantastic. Dwight fires a bullet at John's axe, which splits into 2 and kills 2 walkers. Oh dear God. And Daniel Salazar reappears and does absolutely fuck all. Perhaps the worst crime of all is that the show transformed into a wannabe documentary about a group of charity workers. A show which began centered on this unstable, unpredictable, but ultimately engaging family Leclercs had been turned into the Morgan and Friends show. It appears the protagonists had all become infected with Morgan syndrome. Forget turning into a walker, this is the more deadlier disease. All they did was roam around helping random people we as viewers don't care about. There's no story anymore, it's just let's go here and help this person, let's go and help this person, oh let's go help them. There's even an entire episode which follows the protagonist helping people as seen through the eyes of Al's video camera, which ends up being some kind of promotional video the group are making showing off their services. Now, just think about that for a second. This group are making an advert for their charity service during a fucking apocalypse and then leaving videos at gas stations in the hope someone will stumble upon them and watch them. It's so utterly, incredibly dumb. Whereas the 4th season at least had a few positives to fall back on, there's honestly nothing good I can say about season 5, apart from the fact that it does eventually finish. Sadly, it appears the worst is yet to come. I mean, season 6 trailer does look pretty good, but so did season 5's, and that was atrocious. As expected, neither the writers nor Scott Gimple have taken any criticisms on board whatsoever. It disgusts me that the deluded Scott Gimple has the audacity to compare Fiz's 5th season to the 2nd season of The Walking Dead. These two are nothing alike in terms of quality whatsoever. And when writer Andrew Chambliss was questioned about the show's tragic descent into the abyss, he replied saying that he's proud of season 5, describing it as a story he believes in and that he wanted to dig into facing the apocalypse with a lens that was more optimistic and hopeful and about connection and helping people. Now, I don't know about you, but to me it seems like Chambliss's own personal beliefs are being forced on the show. Everyone is good, no one is bad, let's go help everyone, but that's not what Fear the Walking Dead is about. It's called Fear the Walking Dead for a reason. It's supposed to be dark. It's supposed to be scary. Its point is to get you questioning if the protagonists have gone too far, to make you question who can and who can't be trusted. I didn't sign up to watch Morgan ask me for a donation of £4 a month to help the children of Africa. Okay, that doesn't happen, but I wouldn't put it past it happening in season 6. If Chambliss is passionate about doing a show centered on a bunch of optimists in the apocalypse, then he should have just done a different show entirely. He shouldn't have used Morgan as a tool to rewrite all the characters in an already established program just so he could force his own beliefs down people's throats. We are living in unprecedented times in the real world at the moment, and we are seeing a lot of acts of genuine kindness by people around the globe. Whether it's heroic doctors and nurses coming out of retirement to aid their respective health systems, people delivering food to those who are self-isolating, or someone like me making a video to keep you all entertained. That was a joke, by the way. I no way deserve to be in the same sentence as those people. But let's be honest for a second, does anyone really want to watch a apocalyptic drama about people who only help one another with no real conflict? I don't think so. Whenever the COVID-19 deaths are announced on the news, or any death or tragic news story is in the headlines for that matter, I always find that there's one person who asks the question, oh, why doesn't the news just report on the good stuff? And there's a simple answer for that. We as humans just aren't that interested in it. Headline stories about murders or deaths will always gain more attention than a story about a good Samaritan. Hell, there's a reason why murder documentaries and serial killer documentaries are so popular, because undoubtedly we as a species are drawn to this kind of material. It's in our nature to be curious about this, and in fiction, a post-apocalyptic setting or some kind of disaster is often used as a means of examining humanity, exploring the horrors that some would undoubtedly carry out if there were no government or police stopping them from committing their darkest desires. Watching people be nice to one another just isn't as interesting as watching people tear each other apart. I don't deny that when the shit hits the fan, there are those who will go out of their way to help others, as being evidenced by the situation the world is in today, but that's not Fear the Walking Dead. The show underwent a huge shift in tone when Morgan arrived. Suddenly, everyone has forgotten how dangerous people can be, or they simply just don't care anymore, as nothing will stop them from running headfirst to whoever asks for help, no questions asked. Every single precarious situation that the protagonists find themselves in during season 5 is entirely of their own making. If they had half a brain cell between them, they wouldn't have boarded a plane to help someone they hadn't met over the radio in the first place. How at least Eugene in The Walking Dead didn't suggest sending the entire community of Alexandria to meet Stephanie in case it turned out to be a trap. Fear the Walking Dead is completely unrecognisable now to what it once was. Alicia, Strand, Daniel and Luciana may still look the same as they were when we first met them, but like a deviant Westworld host, they've been reset. Their personalities changed in order for them to serve their new roles of playing Chambliss and Goldberg's version of a Good Samaritan. It's telling that despite how long this video is, there's a ton of criticisms that I have left out and characters that I hadn't really even touched upon. It's a testament to just how bad Fear the Walking Dead's 4th and 5th seasons are that I could go on for even longer, but unlike Fear the Walking Dead, I know when to stop. maybe it's time for Fear the Walking Dead to call it a day, finish whatever charity story it's trying to tell in Season 6, and leave fans to ponder what could have been had Dave Erickson remained showrunner. Fear the Walking Dead could have been a fantastic alternative to The Walking Dead, but sadly it's ended up just being a huge waste of potential. The Walking Dead managed to recover from its blip that was the Negan saga, going on to deliver 2 very good seasons following on from it. However, its success came with getting rid of Scott Gimple. With Scott Gimple still at the helm of Fear and seemingly defending it when faced with any genuine criticism, it appears as if he's going to ignore sense and run it into the ground. Perhaps AMC just don't care about Fear like they do The Walking Dead. If it fails, it fails, which is why Scott and the writers have free rein to keep reducing the level of crap that they do. Only Season 6 will tell if Fear can actually sink any lower, but even if it does somehow manage to be a good season, I just think it's too late, the damage is already done. After the brilliant 3rd season, Fear had the chance to push on and really make a name for itself. However, AMC selfishly traded that opportunity in order to gamble it all on a cheap crossover, gaining a short-term increase of viewers but ultimately ruining any chance of long-term success. Fear the Walking Dead is dead, and like one of its walkers, it's now wandering around aimlessly and needs to be put out of its misery.